I don't normally do anniversary videos like this anymore, since giving myself a rigid deadline kinda stresses me out. But I wanted to make an exception in this case because this feels like an incredibly momentous and fascinating event. Star Wars The Force Awakens was arguably the most anticipated film of the 21st century thus far, coming off of the wildly divisive prequel trilogy that didn't exactly give a lot of classic Star Wars fans their nostalgic fix.
But it got some memes. It preserves to this day.
Here was a true successor to the iconic and beloved original trilogy. One that sought to continue the adventures of cinematic icons we hadn't seen on screen since 1983. Here was an opportunity to return Star Wars to its roots and finally service the fans who hadn't been serviced in a long time by striving to recapture the classic magic of Star Wars above all else. I wonder if you picked up on the red flags I was putting down in that write-up. Yeah, the truth is, the legacy of The Force Awakens and the entire sequel trilogy is complicated. These are films that started out...
Complicated? My guy, they fumbled so hard. It's basically an entire study waiting to be made just to explain just how hard they fumbled.
Generally pretty liked by the vast majority of the fan base, only to now be just as divisive as the prequels were in their day. While the
if not more so.
are currently living it up in the lap of luxury, since they've largely been redeemed in the eyes of the general public. Much of the reason the sequel trilogy is derided to this day is due to the final two installments, The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, since they follow up on the narrative threads laid out by The Force Awakens in somewhat unpopular ways.
More so the notes made in that thing that they never developed.
Everyone pretty much traces the source of this trilogy's issues back to the fact that they didn't have a plan for how the narrative would unfold when they embarked on the endeavor of making them. But that begs the question. So much of the discussion surrounding the sequel trilogy revolves around the choices made in Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. But where does that leave The Force Awakens, exactly? What was once the most anticipated release in the series, and to this day, the highest grossing Star Wars film of all time, is now arguably the least talked about installment in the Skywalker saga.
I'll tell you, it's a rehash, a watered-down rehash, a sloppy watered-down rehash, that while looks good, does nothing in the end.
Because not only is there not a lot to say when compared to its successors, but there isn't a lot that makes it stick out in the grand scheme of the saga for one simple reason. By design, it is the most derivative Star Wars film. I still say the people who call this a shot-for-shot remake of A New Hope are straight up wrong. It obviously switches a lot of elements around.
It's not a shot-for-shot, but it does follow similar story beats. Main protagonist doesn't know their parents in a desert planet, gets rescued by some guy, finds a smuggler in his ship. I mean, again, it's not beat for beat, 1-to-1, but it follows key components, moments, and characterizations. I'm honestly surprised they didn't go out of their way to traumatize Rey's actress with a line as atrocious like the one Mark Hamill had to remember. Guy is still, to this day, having PTSD flashbacks and remembers that line heart to heart, to his heart, even though it's straight up like Vietnam for him. They didn't do that. They didn't go that far, but it is eerily similar. That's essentially it. It's a shattered glass version of the original movie. Not 1-to-1, but very eerily familiar.
But it is the only beat-for-beat remake of a previous installment.
Hey, he said it!
Frustrated a few fans at the time. Others, such as myself, acknowledged that this was a more than reasonable way of just laying the groundwork for a new era with new protagonists. And the next installment could take things in a more unique direction. Boy, did it ever. Now we've seen the full trajectory of the sequel trilogy, and now that a lot of the mysterious questions The Force Awakens initially raised were answered in rather unpopular manners, what's left for The Force Awakens now? What
Nothing.
does this movie have after 10 years? Well, that's the question I'd like to answer today. today, divorced from the context of it being the well-publicized return to form for the Star Wars series a decade ago, does The Force Awakens hold up nowadays? Like, at all? To answer that, I want to briefly ignore the larger implications.
Yeah, that's right. They did crash this thing onto the
saga,
sand.
and just ask for a second here, is this a good movie? Like, on its own, how does it hold up from a writing, acting, directorial, etc. perspective?
Well, before I answer that, I'm just kind of bummed at how expensive going to the movies is now. They were so much cheaper 10 years ago. Everything was so much cheaper 10 years ago. Personally, I'm trying to find new ways to save money and optimize my spending. Not sure if anyone can relate to that. If you can, then today's sponsor, Rocket Money, is here to help. Rocket Money is an easy-to-use app that helps you save more and manage your money better. As someone who has trouble staying on top of managing my finances, Rocket Money makes it simple by providing a single, high-level view of my finances. I don't have to log into several accounts anymore just to stay up to date. It's all thanks to Rocket Money's great bird's-eye view of your finances in a single app, with both high-level and in-depth account insights.
Fast forward.
I forgot to cancel before I got billed. Luckily,
Fast forward.
And it can help cancel them with just a few taps.
Fast forward.
Go to rocketmoney.com/ShapeFrillis to start your free premium trial. You can also scan the QR code or click the link in the description. That's rocketmoney.com/ShapeFrillis. Now back to whatever I was talking about. I don't remember. It's been 10 years. Well, I'm gonna be totally honest, you guys. I still kind of like The Force Awakens. It has problems. Don't worry, I will do some complaining later on. I think as a movie, there is just this undeniable charm to it that The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker didn't really replicate. And I think that all comes down to the characters and their chemistry. Rewatching this movie and really paying attention to elements that weren't just the water or how red it is really reminded me how
the water and how red it is.
The way Finn and Poe play off of each other in the TIE Fighter, or how Finn and Rey interact and bond with each other as they escape Jakku, or how Finn and Han play off of each other. You know what? It's Finn. I think he might actually be the key ingredient that makes this movie so much better than the following two.
I guess it kind of is, because he started off as a stormtrooper, right? That's the whole point. Stormtrooper that, like, inadvertently wanted to ditch the First Order, and, like, he did have his fair share of bad stuff, but he was also, like, the main face, in a sense, to the original, to the sequel trilogy. Like, I remember him more than Rey because he was more on commercials and whatnot. Like, what was the Force Awakens trailer? Because I remember him holding the lightsaber more than Rey, and then in the end it was just like Rey. It really feels like he was supposed to be more central, and they were kind of trying to build up to that, but they then put him in the background and put Rey in the foreground. I don't know. I can see it, though. I do see it.
I like Rey perfectly fine, but there is just something about Finn in this movie. This former stormtrooper running from his past and breaking away from this evil regime, only to finally stop running and establish himself as a true hero of the Resistance. It's pretty special, and it's made a lot better by how charismatic he is. It could be a bit too much
John
of a goofball
Boyega
sometimes, like when he does that "I'm in charge" Phasma bit. I'm with Han on that one. Just bring it down. But overall, John Boyega brings this magnetic quality to the character that make all of his interactions with the others a real highlight to this film. No, I don't think The Last Jedi used him very well at all, but I already made a long-ass video on that movie. I kind of want to leave it out of this one as much as I can. Bottom line is, Finn is kind of the sleeper MVP of this one. I have some problems with the whole Stormtrooper backstory that I'll get to later, but he makes for a really engaging protagonist to follow. And I like Rey in this one. I'm not gonna try and convince you that she isn't a Mary Sue or whatever. I don't even know if people still say that, TBH. But honestly,
I mean, she did have some lines that kinda made her more reasonable, but yeah, she ultimately became more Mary Sue-ish later on. I think this movie balanced it out somewhat, but still, could have been better. That's all I'll say.
Paying close attention to everything she does in this film, I don't know. I bought all of it.
I bought all of it.
Han couldn't because she knew about the changes Unkar Plutt made to it. She's a great pilot because she has the Force. That's why Luke blew up the Death Star and Anakin can pod race at 9 years old. She beat Kylo Ren because he was emotionally distraught from killing his dad, and he was bleeding out because a Sasquatch shot him in the abdomen. Everything checks out to me, dude. I don't know what to tell you. Her abilities don't really matter as much to me as her charisma, and I think Daisy Ridley really brings it here. I love the back and forth she
that's
has
her
with
name.
I think they're such an inspired duo who really bring out the best in each other. I like seeing the mutual respect she and Han start to grow for each other. And I think the seeds of her and Kylo's unique relationship are planted very well in the few scenes they get here. And Kylo, dude, he was kind of amazing from the start.
The
honestly.
Funko Pop.
For a movie devoid of new plot details, they really went ham with all the new and terrifying ways Kylo uses the Force. From stopping a blaster bolt in midair,
That
to
was
mind
cool.
probing, to knocking Rey unconscious with it. And that's on top of what a unique character he is, as a young acolyte of the dark side who's still feeling the call to the light he left behind. That's so interesting. He's a really effective villain who's bolstered by the First Order surrounding him. This is
I wonder what they'll do with him later on.
the only movie in the trilogy that doesn't treat the main villainous faction as a joke. I still don't know why The Last Jedi decided to do that. I mean, sure, real-life Nazis are kind of a joke, but I do want the space fascists to be a little bit intimidating in this fictional world. Snoke is intriguing and has a real sense of power behind him. Hux is deliriously effective when he gives his speech to the First Order before they fire the superweapon. Captain Phasma is... okay, you got me there. She's a
present.
in this one.
She's present.
Oh my god,
Let's just put it...
character.
She's
The
just
First Order
present.
as a whole is sufficiently threatening and evil here. I think the opening scene is tremendously effective. Right from that first shot of the Star Destroyer eclipsing an entire planet. The fact that this friendly old man character and this entire village are massacred before our eyes. It's nice to see the movie deciding not to pull punches right from the start. There are some jokes with the stormtroopers and a couple of funny edits, but they aren't embarrassing, aside from Phasma. While the main characters can sometimes act a little too silly, it's usually a pretty fitting response to a stressful situation that doesn't feel out of place. Overall, I think the tone is immaculate in this film. They don't downplay any of the threats, yet they also manage to get plenty of great comedic bits that still make me laugh even 10 years later. That's the power of great, charismatic protagonists who also have really touching connections to each other. Again, Finn and Rey go together so well. I find it so sweet when he pours his heart out to her at Maz's castle and mentions how she looked at him like no one else ever did. I didn't even necessarily need their bond to be explicitly romantic in the future films, because it's such a sweet platonic friendship that I was consistently delighted by. And there's definitely a reason everyone started shipping Finn and Poe. It was all
They're
here
brothers.
from the start. Their chemistry and the limited scenes they share together is really something special. Okay, I talked a lot of shit about The Last Jedi already, so I really have to ask. With JJ back at the helm of Rise of Skywalker, how was the chemistry between the leads so flaccid in that movie? What even happened? Back on track. While I do think this film has a lot of humanity to it, just in the way the performances play off of each other, part of me started to consider the more cynical angle as to why this is. It's no secret that The Force Awakens was explicitly designed to be the anti-prequel movie. This was meant to win over those Star Wars fans who were burned by the previous trilogy by bringing back everything that made the original trilogy so special, from practical effects to a simple Empire versus Rebellion story. And part of me can't help but feel like that's where this movie's focus on the interpersonal relationships between witty, quippy characters came from. Maybe it sprung from a more business-oriented mindset to ensure that these films weren't seen as cold and inhuman and awkward, which were complaints levied at the prequels when they came out. Once I started thinking about that, I had trouble unseeing it. As much as The Force Awakens was obviously made with a clear passion for the original trilogy, it was also made with an equal level of disdain for the prequels. So much so that the idea of a new republic doesn't even factor into the film at all. We blew up the New Republic. Don't worry about it. It's the Empire versus Rebels again, just like you remember it. There are only passing references to concepts from the prequels, like Kylo saying Snoke should perhaps consider using a clone army. But for the most part, the movie goes out of its way to deny any sort of connection to the trilogy that released right before it. Which is fair enough in a narrative sense, because that era has long passed. But it's one of the elements of The Force Awakens and the entire sequel trilogy that is so odd in hindsight. Because nowadays, this brand is prequel palooza. As soon as Dave Filoni got more and more control at Lucasfilm, and as soon as the higher-ups realized the kids who grew up with the prequels were the right age to be nostalgic for them now, that's kind of been the main focus of Star Wars nowadays. Original trilogy nostalgia is out, prequels and Clone Wars nostalgia are in. Obi-Wan show with Ewan McGregor.
I mean, it's also the fact that maybe due to the fact that in comparison to the original trilogy, the prequels were not only much more memed upon, but also much more widespread in medias and stuff like that. And as a result, they're much more aware of them. I mean, even parodies and stuff like that, and inadvertently drew more to stuff like the prequels. Then again, we do have some parodies that also talk about the original trilogy, so it's kind of a mixed bag. I guess, yeah, prequels win more because they were more widespread in comparison to the original trilogy. So take that with a grain of salt. Also, no, this show is straight up slag. It's not good. 0 out of 10. Can't believe I'm saying this, but watch Rebels. Like, unironically, watch that kids show. It feels more better than whatever they're producing nowadays.
Ahsoka show with Hayden Christensen.
Blech.
Jabba the Hutt from the Clone Wars movie in The Mandalorian and Grogu. Why the f not? So to look back on the Disney Star Wars era before Disney Plus and all its corresponding shows launched, it almost feels like a bygone era of its own. It's genuinely so fascinating seeing how much contempt this trilogy, and specifically this movie, seemingly had for the prequels. But hey, you know what? It's impossible to deny that this is what Star Wars needed at the time. It feels weird to say in 2025 when the prequels are more popular than ever, but the contempt people had for these things when they came out was unreal. I remember I was 7 years old and my dad was explaining the Oscars to me and how they crowned a certain movie Best Picture. And I remember saying, "Oh, I bet it's gonna be Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith." To which he said, no, people didn't like that movie very much. This really shattered my worldview, and I was never the same after hearing it. Okay, quick tangent though. It's kind of insane that none of the prequels were nominated for original score, but all of the sequels were. In what fucking universe, bro? Even if you hated the movie, how is Revenge of the Sith score not awards worthy while the fucking Rise of Skywalker score is? Get real. But to be fair to
Because the people that made fun of us for liking things that we did are now making them. That's why.
The Force Awakens, I think it legitimately added some great new themes to the symphonic legacy of Star Wars. The March of the Resistance music is always cool to hear. Those 4 sinister notes that symbolize the arrival of Kylo Ren go very hard. And especially Rey's theme is just so beautiful and unique. I had never really heard anything like it in Star Wars, and it stuck out in my mind long after I had seen the film. I think this is the only John Williams nomination for the sequel trilogy that was justified. Speaking of which, I also think it's really inspired that in addition to nominations for sound mixing, sound editing, and visual effects, this movie got into the best film editing category at the Oscars. Usually they just fill this category up with Best Picture nominees and call it a day, regardless of how actually special the editing was. But I'm really glad The Force Awakens got in here because this movie is so damn well edited. I know most people don't really pay attention to that sort of thing, but as a YouTube pooper, good editing is my jam. There's a great rhythm to the cuts here, from the way a door shutters only to cut to another door opening in a seamless transition, to Kylo
Yeah, it wasn't that
"What,
seamless,
girl?"
but
as sparks shoot out behind him, only for us to cut to Rey fixing the Falcon in a very precarious situation. The sharp, snappy edits really make the film feel even more alive. Plus, they even keep a few of the goofy PowerPoint transitions we've come to know and love in this series.
Yay.
I think this is my favorite Star Wars film in terms of its editing. Oh, sorry to spoil the eventual ranking on that dumb niche topic. But it's just so strong in that department. And that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of this movie's technical aspects. I'm just gonna say it. The Force Awakens is an extremely well-directed movie. Again, I promise I have issues with the plot and some of the characters that we'll get to, but I really wanted to get a lot of my praises out in the open since, I don't know, who else will praise this movie these days? As a film,
There are
I
people
think
that still
J.J.
do.
Abrams did a tremendous job presenting the most tactile and realistic feeling cinematic view of the Star Wars universe to date. You could argue that Gareth Edwards one-upped him with Rogue One a year later, but at the time, it really struck me just how immersive this version of the Star Wars universe felt. When Finn and Poe steal a TIE fighter and Poe comments on how much it really moves, you can feel it through expert sound and production design, as well as through Oscar Isaac's reaction. Hell, the way he looks around at the hangar bay, or the blaster bolt Kylo is suspending in midair. It's nice to have the characters be amazed by something that's also amazing the audience. Every blaster bolt fired, every ship shot down, every time a lightsaber is ignited, you just feel their power. I had never once considered the sheer unspeakable wonder of Chewie's bowcaster until I saw it fired in this movie. Part of the reason the iconic traitor fight Finn has is so memorable is because of how hard this guy's hits are. The way Rey is slammed against a tree by Kylo Ren, or how Finn's back is sliced up. You just feel it deep down because of how well the movie's effects sell it. Again, is this Disney's way of overcompensating for how fake a lot of people complain the prequels felt? Maybe, but I'm gonna be honest. Regardless of the intentions behind the movie's tactile feel and the actor's wonderful charisma being potentially cynical and rooted in prequel disdain, the end result is so effective that I kinda don't mind. I love the look of the prequels in a lot of areas, and I appreciate how boundary pushing their visual effects were. But this version of Star Wars just feels richer and more immersive. Not the overall universe, mind you. The prequels mop the floor with this movie in terms of world building. But again, looking at things less from a Star Wars point of view and more from a filmmaking point of view, I'm still incredibly impressed with The Force Awakens. You can tell a lot of effort went into the presentation of this movie, and it visually holds up so much better than a lot of blockbusters that have come out since. So to answer the question posited by the video's title, yes, I do think The Force Awakens holds up somewhat, in the sense that it is an enjoyable and agreeable sci-fi spectacle, with a lot of personality to its characters and direction. But does that mean it remains the same magical experience it was back in December 2015, when we were all blown away by the magic of seeing our childhood heroes on the big screen again, in what felt like a blockbuster for the ages? No. To be fair, you might not have even thought that seeing the movie the first time. But that's certainly the vibe I got from my initial theatrical audience. People were invested, laughing, and clapping at every grand nostalgic moment. The opening crawl, the first appearance of Han and Chewie, 3PO, R2, Luke, the Falcon. The applause for Carrie Fisher started out a little bit more hesitantly than everything else, which I thought was a bit rude. Maybe my audience didn't recognize her, I don't know, but after a slow start, she got the claps too. And it wasn't just the nostalgia. They even clapped at Starkiller Base getting destroyed, and especially when Rey used the Force to grab the lightsaber. I distinctly remember one guy shouting, "That's how you make a movie!" Honestly, after an entire decade of Rey discourse, it's kind of refreshing to look back on that memory. Even after seeing it in theaters, everyone was talking about this thing for at least a month, discussing their favorite scenes, trading theories as to who Rey's parents were, and daydreaming about what the great Luke Skywalker was gonna do next. The Force Awakens perfectly did its job capturing the cultural zeitgeist upon its release, which is why it's kind of depressing to look back and realize this movie wasn't exactly built to last. I think it's a really good, fun movie, but despite introducing a new generation of heroes and villains, it feels shockingly disposable in the modern context of the Star Wars saga. Yes, you've waited long enough. I think it's finally time to talk about the aspects of The Force Awakens that I don't think hold up. And
Let
why I
me
would
hear
not
ya.
say it's as good as it was upon initial release. You know, I actually made a quick video on this movie back before media analysis became the focus of my channel. And I'm only starting to realize now that my thesis in 2025 is the same as it was in 2017. The Force Awakens is a great movie, but it's a bad sequel. Actually, I'm gonna demote it just a tad. It's a good movie and a bad sequel. See, I don't think I fully comprehended just how dire the implications of this film were for the greater Star Wars narrative. At the time, I kind of shrugged off the New Hope comparison because I liked the characters in this new film, and they made it feel fresh. But now, I kind of just have to face the facts and realize that The Force Awakens doomed the post-Return of the Jedi narrative. By presenting a universe 30 years later where everything was more or less the same as where we left off, we essentially closed this entire 30-year period off from making any meaningful changes to the status quo.
It reverted.
What happened in that Ahsoka show with Grand Admiral Thrawn mounting a comeback for the Empire? Oh, it doesn't really matter. He'll be gone, Ahsoka will be gone, and the Empire will just come back in the form of the First Order, since somehow Palpatine returned. It's so neat if there was some mystery as to what the state of the galaxy could look like, following the era they're currently focusing on in the Disney Plus shows. But we already know. Nothing much changes.
Republic
and
gets
Zombie
nuked.
Palpatine is behind it all. I know Palpatine returning isn't the fault of The Force Awakens, but those seeds would have never been sown if we could have done something a little more unique with this trilogy's conflict. Did it need stormtroopers? Did it need an Empire versus Rebels conflict again?
Nah.
You have to look at this from the cynical shareholder perspective, where, hey, people liked the original trilogy and they didn't like the prequels. We need to make another original trilogy pronto. I'm not gonna act like that wasn't a smart business decision at the time. Even if, like I said, the decision to completely shut the prequels out of this trilogy looks more and more silly with each passing year. But I think the cynical mindset present within the very conception of the sequels shows exactly why kids these days are flocking to the prequels in droves and leaving the sequels in the dust. The Force Awakens is just not a very imaginative movie. And I don't think the first installment of a brand new era of Star Wars stories really could have afforded to be that in hindsight. Now we forever have to deal with the knowledge that 30 years later, Han is still smuggling, Leia's still rebelling, Admiral Akbar is still Akbaring. We're not allowed to
Akbaring.
evolve these
Till the
characters'
end of,
roles because
until the
doing
Last
so
Jedi,
is
that is.
antithetical to the task of
Rip our
making
guy.
a commercially viable, box office shattering, crowd pleasing Star Wars film. Whether you think he succeeded or not, you can't deny that Rian Johnson tried to evolve Luke as a character, and it was the most controversial choice in a long line of controversial choices for this
Did he
series.
really
So
evolve
again,
him, though?
The Force Awakens was the smartest kind of movie
Did he?
they could have made in the short term. I just think it's responsible for this being the most boring and least fleshed out era of Star Wars to date. And artistically, I just don't think it's helped Star Wars in the long run. We haven't really gotten any good stories that branched off from the sequel trilogy. Even if you don't love Rogue One, you absolutely have to give it credit for laying the groundwork for Andor to happen. The Clone Wars is the gift that keeps on giving, with so many projects being
The
born
gift
from
that
it.
keeps on giving. Please, my guy. It was something, it turned into a sequel show called Rebels, and then it basically started turning out stories that either didn't make any sense or were just straight up boring. Maybe I should watch that mole show. A lot of people seem to give opinions on it, but I don't know. I've lost interest in everything Star Wars related a long time
Even
ago.
if not all of them are great. The legacy of the sequel trilogy is nothing currently outside of the trilogy itself, which consists of maybe the most universally hated Star Wars film there is, easily the most polarizing Star Wars film there is, and, you know, the one that nobody really has much to say about anymore.
The most
The Force
forgettable one.
Awakens. It exists. Okay. But does fan reception really matter that much? Does the impact it has on the franchise as a whole really mean anything? What about the movie itself? It's good. I like it. I said as much. Case closed, right? So remember how I said I thought this movie was great before, and now I demoted it to good? I'm gonna be honest, the third act of this movie does not hit anymore. On this rewatch, I thought it was a bit of a chore. It was shallow and pedantic. The Force Awakens is a movie that gradually gets worse the longer it goes on. I think the first act does a great job of introducing its characters and their dynamics, largely because it's completely allowed to focus on them. Aside from the concept of a droid with a thing that needs to get to the rebellion who's now on a desert planet, this is the part of the movie that almost entirely feels like its own thing. A true, new Star Wars film. And the second act is pretty good. I think Han and Chewie are well implemented. I like how they play off of Finn and Rey. And I especially think it was smart to only focus on them for a bit, instead of throwing in a bunch of returning faces. This movie makes great use of Han Solo, without making it feel like he's taking away from our new protagonists. Then we go to a new cantina, and we see a new Death Star blow up a new planet, and I don't want to say the third act of this movie is bad. It's still cute, pulpy fun. But it is very been there, done that. The entire space battle is just kind of white noise, with the infiltration of Starkiller kind of just being more of the same, and the lightsaber duel being perfectly fine. I'm not asking for prequel level choreography or anything, but it does kind of pale in comparison to the more psychological aspects of the original trilogy duels. Now the third act kind of lucked out, because it does contain the best scene in the movie, in between all this standard stuff. I think the moment where Han confronts his son and is subsequently killed is genuinely tremendous. I talked about it a bit in my jokey joke shitpost video about the color red.
Red,
but the
not
lighting
red.
here, when Kylo is torn between the dark and the light sides, and you can see it on his face, sublime. We're also given a throwaway line earlier about how when the sun goes down, the weapon is fully charged. And it looks like Kylo might actually go with his father. But then, wouldn't you know it, the sun goes down. Without any words, you understand that the dark, the allure of power, is beckoning to him. So he kills his father. Honestly, I was alright with this since I felt the movie gave me all I needed of an older Han Solo. It was a powerful send-off to a character who finally decided to stop running, and a good indication that the younger
A character that was regressed back to his old self and then became something that should have been from the get-go. Enough said.
generation could pick up the conflict from here. Oh yes, sorry, I forgot. This is the negative section of the video. Yeah, that's the one standout part in this third act. The rest is just Star Wars. And for a movie that genuinely started out feeling
that's
so
one way to
fresh
put
and
it.
unique in that first act, it's a bit disappointing. It feels a little bit like the movie considers the compelling, wordless portrait of Rey's miserable life on Jakku to be the vegetables you have to eat before you get to the yummy dessert that is C-3PO and his red arm. But does that mean the first two acts of this movie are flawless?
Still a weird thing to have him with a
absolutely
red
not.
arm.
As much as I praised
It's just
Jayden's
out of
character
nowhere.
earlier, I feel like the whole reformed stormtrooper angle really isn't fleshed out as well as it could have been, especially in regards to how he treats his fellow troopers as the movie goes on. Remember, his initial motivation for turning good is that one of his comrades dies right in front of him. What's he doing going around mercilessly shooting these other stormtroopers? Just stabbing one in the fucking chest with a lightsaber without a second thought. I was rewatching K-pop Demon Hunters the other day, you know, as you do. And I saw that scene where
No,
Ruby
I
is
don't. Who the hell? What? What is this?
going through a crisis of faith. So she starts questioning one of the demons and asking if he's a prisoner too. And I was like, hey, how come Finn never did that even once in this movie? I know they're in a lot of high-stake battle situations, but theoretically, any one of these troops could be another Finn. Someone who just needs a little nudge to break away from their programming and turn to the light side. But that's complicated and it'll take a while, so let's just kill them all. F it, why not? I don't know, man. Would it have been so hard for him to just talk to a stormtrooper at any point, ask them why they're doing this, the brainwashing can't have been that strong considering Finn just acts like a normal goofy dude the whole time. I wouldn't say they bit off more than they could chew with this whole child soldier stormtrooper concept. It's more like they shoved it down their throat without even attempting to chew it once. I also think the explanation of how they got Poe out of the narrative without killing him off is really odd and flimsy, obviously stemming from a last-minute decision to not kill him off. The movie is generally pretty funny, but some jokes just
I had no
don't
idea about
land. With that, who talks first? You talk first, I talk first thing Poe does, being a pretty early low point. One scene that
What? But that's the whole point of him having those, to be the witty, fun pilot, you know? A bit diverse. That was kind of cool, I thought. Like, having him a bit more conversational as opposed to, like, collectively crapping himself when confronted with the main bad guy. Makes him a bit more unique.
I was especially struck by how bad the writing was in is the scene where Han and Leia talk about losing Ben to the dark side and what they did in the years since. It's so expository and unnatural. It feels like they're saying this stuff to people who don't actually know what happened. And then Leia
Because we don't know what happened.
Was Snoke. He seduced our son to the dark side. I don't know, that just sounds like a prequel line to me. It comes across as really silly hearing the name Snoke come out of Leia's mouth. Like, how is she on a first name basis with this guy? There are other small details here and there I could talk about, like why did they bring BB-8 into the castle instead of just leaving him on the ship? But I don't really want to be one of those YouTubers.
Because he's an astromech, you never know when you'll need one. R2 was brought into the Death Star and he was useful still. Way more useful, actually. Like, that's a bit like picking details that quite literally don't make sense. Why they bring him along? Why not?
Who complains about every little thing, like how Han forgot his keys in the Falcon or whatever. I think when we're looking at the big picture of The Force Awakens, it's an enjoyable, if notably flawed, film in its own right that really worked at the time it came out, and still manages to be a pretty fun watch to this day. You might be wondering if I think the mystery box elements in this movie being paid off by all that bullshit The Rise of Skywalker cooked up means that this film is now soured as a result.
Yes.
I think it still works in spite of that. The mystery is kind of just the icing.
See, the problem is, if it was its own individual movie, sure, it could be passable, if not reasonable, but knowing full well it has a sequel, 2 sequels that follow after it, and pretty much explain its whole story, in comparison to one that is literally eye candy with barely any substance, and comedic nonsense with repeated storylines from old media, this one really does just straight up not only lose its focus, impact, general existence, and just becomes the forgettable one. Which is extra hilarious given the fact that it's supposed to be the one you start off with.
Here. It's still a self-contained movie with a beginning, middle, and end that just leaves opportunities for certain questions to be answered in the future. Yippee! But ultimately, while the current legacy of The Force Awakens is generally one of indifference, who's to say its reception won't change and evolve in the future? I mean,
it's
if
possible.
the prequels can get redeemed, anything can happen. I know it seems unlikely now, but those kids who grew up on the sequel trilogy are gonna be of age and ready to make YouTube videos on why their childhood Star Wars movies are cinematic masterpieces soon enough. Or they could also turn out to be prequel fans, who knows. Anyway, I guess that's about it. Suppose I'll see you in another 10 years to see how well and or poorly this film holds up then. I'm not talking about The Last Jedi for its 10-year anniversary. We're done with that one. Same goes for The Rise of Glup Shido Walker, whatever. Maybe. We'll see. Good night, Tri-State Galaxy.
Rise of the Sith spit. I ain't gonna lie. I'm gonna be real with y'all. The disappointing factor is that the sequels were so atrocious. They didn't really give us anything to look forward to, much less build upon. Like, I know that there's like a comic series with Poe, and Lego did some funny spin offs, but aside from that, what is there to say? Like, there's a reason for why everyone jumps back to the prequels. It's because also stuff like the Old Republic was made to focus on, like, the past of Star Wars. It's why stuff like the Clone Wars was created to have these types of stuff in them as well. It's why these shows take place after the events of episode 6, yet decide to contain themselves in their own story as opposed to like keeping the original and prequel series in mind. Overall, it just flops because, well, the it just leaves nothing interesting to evolve. It literally goes to such a factory reset. Nothing from the past would fit into this, and nothing they do would subsequently be interesting. Because it all just kind of cuts everything out and just does something that inadvertently makes you realize nothing's gonna matter in the end. Like he said before with the whole Ahsoka thing, like, it seems like they could make it interesting only for it to just knowing for a fact that Ahsoka is gone. The sequels confirm it. She's gone. She's a part of Force. And so you'll assume that every villain and everything else just gets the story resolved and ultimately concludes in that series. Like, they don't build up to it. It could have been fine to have like an epic final showdown where the characters end, but no such thing. TLDR, the sequels have nothing to offer and nothing to go from to develop a story. It's, as the old saying goes, a cash grab. Literal cash grab. And it does nothing more or less.